edition of the Nahar Jito Bookathon, presented in association with the Raisoni Foundation. In this session, we explore the book Rani Durgawati, The Forgotten Life of a Warrior Queen by Nandini Sen Gupta. This book is about Gond Rani Virat Durgawati, Queen of the tribal kingdom of Garha Mandala, who ruled more than 450 years ago and died fighting for her dharma. Now a little bit about the author. Nandini Sen Gupta is a Pondicherry-based journalist and author of historical fiction and narrative history. She has 6 best-selling books to her credit and has been published by HarperCollins India, Hachette India, Good Earth Publications and Random House India. She is currently writing her first narrative non-fiction biography for Penguin India. Her latest book, The Ocean's Own, came out in June 2021. So this is the book on Rani Durgawati. This is in fact her first non-fiction historical account. It's about the queen, as I just told you. And so Nandini, right at the beginning, I'd like to ask you, like, you have written non-fiction and you have focused on the Gupta period. Now, can you tell me how did you come upon Rani Durgawati and why this era and why her reign?
So, Rani Durgawati's story, it's not like I found the queen, it's like the queen found me. Because I have a very personal connect with Jabalpur, which is kingdom of Garha Mandala or Garha Katanga, because my grandfather used to work at the gun and shell factory in Jabalpur, and my father grew up there, and I'm hearing stories about in Jabalpur. And while researching an earlier book called The Blue Horse, I came across Rani Durgawati's story in connection with her relationship with her elephant Salman. And when I read that story, it was almost like she was a relative who I had known, but somehow did not know enough about her. I've only heard traces of her, and I was intrigued and I wanted to know more. And when I started reading a little bit more about her, I was utterly fascinated because she came across as the most modern medieval monarch anywhere in the world, not just in India, but anywhere in the world. Remember, she was a contemporary of Queen Elizabeth I, who is hailed as, this exceptional monarch worldwide. But if you look at Rani Durgawati and how well she ran her kingdom despite the aggressions around her, despite the threats to her life, you will see that she's no way less than Elizabeth Tudor, and in many respects better.
So your earlier works have been historical fiction, which actually demands that you delve into primary data sources and around which you build the fictional aspects, but you don't deviate from the basic historical facts. So that requires you to entirely non-fiction. So can you tell us about your research? Like, what have you gleaned information?
So the research part of it has been the most enjoyable part of this journey. I must say that I approached this project with quite a bit of trepidation because I am not a historian. I never claimed to be one. I am a journalist, and I thought that I would do to this subject, to the Queen, what I do to any of the subjects that I handle every day as a journalist. I'm going to talk to both sides. I'm going to talk to everyone, what we call 360-degree coverage. I'll talk to everyone, and I will then try and glean a story from out of that without any bias. I'll go with a clean slate and figure out the story for myself. And that is pretty much what I have done. With Rani Durgawati, the problem was that there aren't that many primary sources at all. The most reliable primary source is Abul Fazl's Akbarnama. But you must understand, Abul Fazl was Akbar's hagiographer, and Rani Durgawati was Akbar's adversary. She was in fact killed in a battle between her and the Mughal Empire, and Akbar's senior general, Asaf Khan, was the person who was responsible for taking over her kingdom, for invading her kingdom, for her death, as well as the death of her son. So it is not going to be, her story is not going to be looked at in an unbiased manner by this primary source. Keeping that in mind, I looked at other primary sources. There were other people. There was Ferishta, for instance, who was the Deccani version of Abul Fazl, and who also wrote about Rani Durgavati quite a bit. There were other chroniclers. There were Sanskrit sources, Sanskrit literary sources. There were numismatic sources. There were coins that have been found there right now in the British Museum, like so much of our heritage. And there's also a lot of secular literature. But the most interesting source of stories about the Rani are the legends, folk songs, folk tales that have survived for 500 years, pretty much unchanged. So what I did was I sort of donned a journalist's hat and I went around recording those songs, recording those stories, and including them as secondary sources in my telling of the story.
So now let us focus on the Queen, because she is really the main subject of our discussion today. And we'll look at various facets that constitute her personality. And the very first one, of course, is her administrative capacities. After all, she was a queen.
Yes.
She had to administer. So can you touch upon what were the basic principles with which she looked at her praja and to her people?
See, Rani Durgavati's reign of 15 years, she was a regent. For her underage son, and her reign of 15 years was so exceptional, not only because it brought security for the people, and remember, she was a queen whose kingdom was battered by invasions from jealous neighbors, and she had to face more than 50 skirmishes, around 52, 53 skirmishes in 15 years. So she never had a moment to breathe easy and say, okay, fine, I've managed to make sure that my restive neighbors are now, they have been quietened down, and I can now focus on internal administration. She never had that chance. But despite that, her administration was so good, it was so pro-people, it was so empathetic, that she is hailed as a model monarch to this day. And the interesting thing is, if you document the Gond folk songs, you will see again and again, and this has remained unchanged. I spoke to some of the Gond balladeers in and around Mandla and Narsinghpur districts, and all of them said the same thing, that when it comes to the best possible king or the best possible monarch, Rani Durgavati is the gold standard. She was the best. Nobody has ever come anywhere close to her. And so much so that they have actually turned her into a goddess. You go to Jabalpur, the outskirts of Jabalpur, there is her samadhi. And people give diya bati offering, diya bati like lamp and flower offering to her statue and to the statue of her elephant Sarman. She is a goddess. She is like her celestial namesake, Goddess Durga. And that has come because she gave her people incredibly stable and empathetic administration. What do I mean by that? Very quickly, 2-3 points. Number one, hers was a remote tribal kingdom, right? Their main resource was forests. So obviously she used forest resources, particularly elephants, timber, chironji seeds, bamboo, etc. Those were the products that she traded with other kingdoms around her. But that's not all. That is only one part of the story. The other part of the story, she realized that she needed to make her kingdom a grain bowl so that her people would never go hungry and they would never go thirsty. Remember, this area is adjoining Bundelkhand. This is a rain-parched, traditionally thirsty area. What does she do? She tells the people, I am going to make an example by digging lakes. And I am going to offer you that same thing. If you go and dig a lake and make a piece of land arable, that land is yours to cultivate. So during her time, that area, that kingdom of Garha Mandla, was known as the land of Bawan Tal Talav. She was known as the Tal Talav Rani. And she dug so many wells and so many lakes that a land which was once a parched land became a grain bowl, and no less than Abul Fazl says that she used to export grains to the Deccan and to Gujarat. That's how her kingdom became so rich. Because not only were they exporting forest produce, they were also exporting grain and other things.
There is reference in your book about points and the evidence of trade with places as far as Nepal.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a cache of coins that was found in 1907, between 1907 and 1911. This was found just in the outskirts of Jabalpur, near what was once one of her summer palaces called Madan Mahal. And that cache of coins had silver and gold coins from as far away as Nepal, also closer home, the Deccani kingdoms, Gujarat. There were gold coins from Alauddin Khilji's time. So this kingdom was an extremely rich kingdom and very well managed. And her people, if you look at the way she handled her people in terms of taxation, in terms of the way justice was given, it was very, very empathetic, very lenient. And people could pay their taxes in forest produce. They could pay their taxes in gold coin. They could pay their taxes in elephants, whatever they wanted. And she encouraged them to have this kind of harmonious relationship with the forests, which of course, after she died, after the Gond reign came to an end, that harmonious existence was disrupted.
So when it comes to administration, I want you to make a parallel between the peasant distress that we have seen, which is very clearly on record right from the time of the establishment of the Sultanate, where taxation actually was so abnormally high that you had massive distress, you had resultant famine, you had peasantry fleeing the lands, hiding in the forests. It's all been recorded. Compared to her relationship and what really worked, what is it in the administrative process of the Mughals or the Sultanate that made it so that those in charge of lands looted, whereas those that the administrative posts that she had in her government actually were not exploitative, and yet she was prosperous. So can you just compare the two and what worked with?
That's a very good question, because there are two or three things. Firstly, you have to understand that Garha Mandla, being a Gond kingdom, tribal kingdom, they were far more federal than any of the more centralized empires, whether you are talking about the Sultanate or you talk about the Mughals or later on the British. So those centralized governments did not really have local interests on their radar. They were more focused on revenue collection rather than looking at what the people of that land wanted or may have needed. In her case, the entire kingdom was divided into Gar districts, so fortress districts. And those were run by local sardars or rajas who had a very nominal sort of very hands-free kind of a relationship with her. They pretty much ran their districts independently, except when there were issues about, say, there was a spy, or there was somebody who was a traitor, or there was a massive issue of going against the central administration, which had to be then escalated from the village level to the district guard level to Rani Durgawati herself. Only then the matter came to her. Otherwise, she didn't interfere. It was a completely federal structure. It was handled locally by the local Gar Rajas and at the village level by the Patwaris or the Sardars. And the second important distinction is that these roles were hereditary. You see, what changed was that when the Mughals invaded, and for 20-25 years, between 1564, when Rani Durgawati dies, and 25 years in, towards the end of the 16th century, when Garha reverts to control by the Gond king, these intervening 5 years saw a revolving door of Mughal subedars coming and going. Now, you have to understand what used to happen in the Mughal Empire. The subedars were not hereditary governors, right? So the Jagirs were not hereditary. If you died, the Jagir died with you, and it would be given to somebody else, which meant that if you are a Mughal Jagirdar and you're going to a place, you are trying to maximize revenue from that place, because you have to give X amount, say 100 rupees to the emperor, But if you're making 150, you only get to keep 50. If you're making 200, you get to keep 100, and so on. So your attempt is to try and extract as much as possible from the peasantry, because you know that
Yes.
2 years later you may be gone and someone else will take over the job. So there is a very short-sightedness in this structure, this revolving door. Of course, it was done for a reason, because Akbar always sent a Jagirdar to a place as a precursor to a military campaign. And it was true for Karamandla as well. Mirza Aziz Khoka's Deccan campaign, before he went on that, he was first posted in Baram, and so on. And that is true for every single campaign that he has had. First, you have a civil administration who goes there, they suss out the land, and then comes the military campaign. So there is a reason why he used to do that. But for the people, it was disastrous, because the unit official governing that area locally had no stake in that. You really have a stake in the place that you are governing, because you know that in 3, 5, 4 or 5 years, you will be gone, someone else will come. If you happen to die in the campaign, then the Jagir goes to someone else. So you are living every day for every day to extract as much as possible. And that means that you're neglecting the needs of that land. And that is something that the Mughals had, and that is something that the British had even more. Because again, the British civilians would come and go, and there was a revolving door. They didn't really establish any personal connect with the people they were governing. And as a result, they had absolutely no interest in looking at the survival and prosperity of their people, rather than extracting resources from that people.
So this actually brings it to my next point, that the Hindu kingdoms of the time, and we can make Rani Durgawati actually a case study of this principle, that Dharma was never very far from the monarch.
Yeah.
And also with Durgawati, what strikes the reader is that she's extremely pious. The prayer she does before battle. So can you talk to us about that aspect of? You've talked about the relationship with the tribals, the care for the environment, catchment ponds, and all of that, which is unusual. Which is very, very, very much with the welfare of the king, the people in her mind. But now, can you talk to us a little bit about the dharma aspect, the temple, the pious nature of her, and how that actually reflects, or sort of is the lens through which, or the principles through which they govern their kingdom, because of which we didn't see much famine, we didn't see much distress, we hardly even have any recorded history of revolts. So can you talk about that aspect of her administration?
So, this is, you have to understand that Rani Durgawati, the way she was a very unusual medieval monarch, but she was no outlier. This combination of the sacred and the secular was very much a part of the Raj Dharma of a lot of monarchs. And I can, off the top of my head, I can think of people like Ahalya Bai, for instance. She is a very good example of that. I can think of many others. Rudramadevi is a very good example of that. There are many, many others. And, the fact that your secular dharma and your sacred dharma are intertwined is a long tradition in India's kingship. And in the case of Rani Durgawati, of course, it becomes even more interesting, because I always see her as one of our most prominent feminist rulers. But this feminism is very different from the Western idea of feminism that we have come to read about or espouse today, because there is no difference, or there is no between feminism and femininity in her. So therefore, on the one hand, she's documenting all of her sacred duties. There's a very beautiful book called Prastav Ratnakar. Prastav Ratnakar was a book that she commissioned during her lifetime. And it was like a dummy's guide. It was for her child, for her son. And that book documents both the sacred rituals that the queen has to do and the king has to do on an everyday basis, as well as before going to battle, as well as on special occasions. But it also has things like remedies for scorpion bite. What will you do if you go bald? How will you handle it if you have a very big feast and you have a stomach upset? So you have all sorts of very handy knowledge. And there's no quarrel between the two. On the one hand, you have knowledge about scorpion bites. On the other hand, you have knowledge about how to invoke Vishnu and what are the sacred dates on which you can do temple consecration. There is no quarrel between the two. And in the heads of most of these monarchs, there was no quarrel. It was one and the same thing. The Raj Dharma itself had two aspects. There was a secular aspect and there was a sacred aspect. And both sort of came together seamlessly to be part of the monarch's outlook of what he or she had to do.
So her reign was all of 15 years, and she, as we have seen, her kingdom prospered. It was a rich kingdom. There was a very good output because society was largely agrarian and the tribal relationship with the forests. She built temples, she built the tanks, she took care of the environment. But one would imagine, but it's not true to think that she didn't have a military aspect to her reign. So can you throw light on that? Like, what did she have to face militarily and how did she fare as a warrior, princess?
Yeah, so Durgavati's reign of 15 years was buffeted by invasion after invasion after invasion, skirmish after skirmish after skirmish, many of them from jealous neighbors. And in each of them, you must remember that here is a woman who has faced more than 50, between 53 and 54 skirmishes in 15 years, and she remained unvanquished till one battle, the last battle of her life, in which she killed herself before she could be captured, defeated. Okay, so technically her entire military career, there is not one blemish on it. It's fantastic. It is unheard of. And remember also that she was up against neighbors who were much better equipped militarily than she was. You have to understand that as a tribal kingdom, because of the federal structure of Garha, the army that she had at her disposal was not uniformly trained or uniformly armed. Okay, some Garha, the Garha governor was very good and trained the people very well and armed them very well. Some were not so efficient and they were not as inspiring leaders, and the training and army was not as good. So you have a bunch of, say, 5,000 people who have 5,000 different standards. It's not standardized. Whereas the Mughal army, for instance, not only was it superior in numbers, they were also uniformly armed and uniformly trained. Right. So and she didn't have cannons.
Yes. That was the undoing.
But that undoing also happened because her generals didn't listen.
That's what I wanted to get to that.
Yeah. So this is a kingdom that doesn't have cannons. It more or less depends on terrain. They don't get it perfect. Correct. Long before, Durgavati died in 1564. So a good 50, 60, 70 years before Shivaji became famous for that, she was doing this. She was using her terrain in such a way it was most replaced,
Yes.
And particularly somebody like Baz Bahadur, that
battle is very well described.
Very well described. He was defeated so badly that he went back and started drinking himself silly.
Yes.
So she is a fantastic military general.
So do you think, just for because you've studied her, you've read about her, and she basically fought with men. Do you think that any of the battles she fought, there was a certain condescension or certain assumption that she will not measure up to be a good warrior? Did she have to, or did they quickly realize that they can't take her? They have to take her seriously.
I think it's a bit of both, and that may sound contradictory, but I think that's a clearer picture. Because on the one hand, you have the Miana Afghans.
The diplomacy, you can actually combine these two, because the second thing that you have to talk about is that she was a queen with very good actually diplomatic capacities. One is that she actually had made it very clear to Akbar that she's not in confrontation with it, which sort of lasted for as much as it could.
Yeah.
Till, of course, the man has to succumb.
Yeah.
And the other one is, the absolute marvel of getting, not only defeating the Afghans, but actually get those generals to die for her in battle. Yeah. So that skill, that diplomatic skill.
So can you imagine, these are These are Miana Afghan generals. Again, I mean, look at her liberal credentials, because we talk about Akbar as a very liberal king, but all of these Muslim generals, having been defeated by her, were so inspired by her. They were her main, some of the main generals for these Muslim, and every single one of them gave their lives fighting for us. Every single one, down to the last man. And also, so clearly she was an inspiring enough leader that they thought that, okay, fine, she may be a woman, but she's a good enough leader and a great enough leader for us to fight alongside her. But at the same time, at the crucial battle of Narayanala, her generals second guessed. And this is very sad. And it is she would not have lost that battle, because what we don't read that often in history books, of course, we don't read about her at all in history books. But, in the Battle of Narayanala happened over 2 days. And in the first day, when they followed her tactics, her battle tactics, they actually won a decisive victory. And Abu Fazl himself says that more than 300 Mughal soldiers were slaughtered. That is Abu Fazl saying. Remember, he is the Mughal hagiographer. Yeah, so even if you assume that he's been very, very conservative estimate, 300 people dying is a lot. It's a lot. There's a medieval war that is happening. So it was a decisive victory. She goes back to her camp and she tells her generals, listen, we don't have cannons. We make sure that we go and take on Asaf Khan's cannons tonight while we have the advantage. Because tomorrow morning, those cannons they're fighting in a narrow defile, right? Between two rocky outcrops. So it's a narrow defile. So when they bring those cannons into the defile, we will move. Generals, they refuse. They are on a high. They're on an adrenaline rush. We've just won victory. Let us rest today. Tomorrow morning, we'll take them on. Then she goes back to her tent and calls her closest generals and tells them, I'm going to lead this. And again, the men around her don't want to think out of the box, because people in medieval India did not do night fights. See, this is what she did later on out of the box thinking. He said, I'm going to do all sorts of fights if it wins me the war. Right? So she says, we have to go now. We have to go at night. And they say, no, that's against the rules. The rules of the game say we don't fight it.
In fact, this has been a little bit of a major reason for the downfall of many of our Hindu kings, who just did not understand the altered rules of engagement that this new enemy came up with. They had actually no rule.
Yeah.
Whereas we continue to fight with our principles that you do not, shoot at a retreating army, you don't do this, you don't do that and the other. So that has been even upgrading, because I think I'd asked you this question before, in general conversation, is that, our battle tactics, the elephant, the archers, it had worked so well up until then because we faced similar armies when we fought kingdom against kingdom. But this was something completely different. So,
So our warfare and strategy, in fact, if you read Prastav Ratnagar, you will see that the Vyuho formations, the battle formations, they are taken from the Mahabharata.
Yes.
The crocodile formation, the moon formation, all of those. They're taken from the Mahabharata. So you are following the traditional Vyuha formation, and you are doing it by the book. But you have to think out of the book you have to think on your feet. And to her credit, she was. She was thinking out on her feet, but the men around her did not listen. And next morning, when they woke up, 2 things happened. Number 1, the weather turned. This was June. This was the 24th of June. So this is traditionally monsoon time. Monsoon breaks around that time. The sky was overcast. Narmada was in spate, and the river, that defile was getting flooded. So which means that it is blocking your exit. You can't exit easily. And the second thing that happened was, during the night, Asaf Khan had moved his cannons into the defile.
Exactly what she had anticipated.
Exactly what she had said.
So now, you have just touched upon the fact that, being a benevolent, prosperous ruler is not an exception with regard to her. But now, can you place Durgawati in terms of our long history and the position of women as rulers and women of power? What does our history tell us? Is she an aberration? Is she a part of a long line of warriors? Is it a recent phenomena? Like, can you place the empowered woman in administration in our history?
So that's a really nice question, Alu, because a lot of people tell me that was Rani asked me this question, that was Rani Durgavati an exception?
Yeah.
In some ways, she was. She was such an exceptional ruler that that clearly made her stand out. But she was not no outlier because she was part of a very long tradition of Viranganas in Indian history. And in fact, that goes back to the epics. If you look at some of the women in the Mahabharata, you will see that this whole aspect of the queen being responsible both militarily as well as administratively is something that is acceptable even back then. And if we look at closer to our time, to Rani Durgavati's time, there is a long line of really, really feisty women rulers that we have. I mean, one of the earliest rulers that I can think of is a lady called Prabhavati Gupta. And I'm sure if you ask the person on the street, they will not be able to tell you who Prabhavati Gupta is. Prabhavati Gupta was Chandragupta Vikramaditya's daughter. She was the queen regent of the Vakataka Empire, and she ruled for about 20 odd years. Excellent administrative ruler and a real feminist, because in her Pune inscription, she refers to herself by her father's, by her father's putra rather than her husband's. So you can imagine. I mean, this is a woman who ruled in the 3rd and 4th century CE, and from there to people like Abakka Chauta, people like Naiki Devi, people like Tarabai, people like Rudrama Devi. I mean, there is an entire long line of Viranganas in India, and that is a tradition. We've always had that tradition. And Durgavati is very much part of that tradition. She's not an outlier. And in fact, whenever I talk about feminism in Indian history, sometimes people will say, "Oh, but there was also Sati, there was also Johar, and all of that." Sure, there was Sati, there was Johar, and there were some practices which were not, enlightened or not savory even. But that does not detract from the essential role of the queen as somebody who was very, very important, not only politically, but also sometimes militarily. And if we have had women administrators, even in post-independence India, not only in the center, but also in the states, they are all part of that same tradition of women having equal play in the political life.
So now, you have spoken about the fact that, you listed out a list of women. And then, yet you said that we might not know them. And there's a good reason for it, because even in your book, you have the warrior queen, and then you have the forgotten life.
Yes.
So can you explain this?
So this is very sad. Honestly, I mean, and I have a bit of a gripe, because I'm not a historian. I read history for fun. I think history is incredible because it's about our story. We are nothing without our stories, and history tells us our stories. But the way it is taught in our classrooms is very dry, very one-sided, and with a definitive male gaze. And that male gaze, if you take the greats in Indian history, Gupta the Great, Akbar the Great, they are all men. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have really, really feisty women ruling parts of India. We did. It's just that our mainstream narrative has kind of airbrushed their voices out. And I'll just go back to Rani Durgavati a little bit. If you look at Rani Durgavati, if you just do a Wikipedia stub or something, you will find that she is relegated to a footnote in her own story. Gond Queen defeated by Akbar. 2 lines. But that's not what she was. She was an incredible monarch. And India is too big and too diverse for us to have just one narrative that is supplanting everything else. Our history has to be a patchwork print. And unless we talk about these local heroes, unless we talk about their story, the overall picture, the jigsaw puzzle, will never be complete. So I think this is very important. We need to talk about these women heroes because their voices so far have not been heard.
So, Madhya Pradesh, for the longest time, hopefully it is going to see better days. It has been seeing better days now. It has been among the poorer states of India. It has migrant laborers and things like that. So there is from your book, actually, you understand why. From being this prosperous kingdom that recognized and valued the relationship the tribals had with the jungles and essentially never went hungry and had a surplus of production, to the famines that are recounted, and you've quoted some of the songs that are literally heartrending. So very quickly, if you could just go through her administrative policies very quickly to what the Mughals did, since we have the time, and then also with especially the British policies, and compare that. Here is a Hindu woman, a lady, a widow, who has, I think, beaten every single stereotype. And she had a prosperous kingdom, and how rapidly the deterioration happens because your intention is not to rule with keeping your praja happy. It's just quickly contrast her rule to what subsequently followed.
So if you go and talk to the Gond Samaj leaders, tribal Gond Samaj leaders today in modern day Madhya Pradesh, and I spoke to a lot of them. And they are all unanimous in saying, whenever I ask them, who are your idols? And they say, we have two Balidan Divas in our calendar. The first is 24th June, which is Rani Durgawati's Balidan Divas, that is the day she died. And the second is the Balidan Divas of Shankar Raghunath, Raja Shankar Raghunath. They are the last monarchs, the last Gond monarchs. Now, why are these two people, I've been talking about Rani Durgawati so much, I think we should just take 2 minutes to talk about Raja Shankar Raghunath. This father and son duo were the last Gond rulers, and they threw in their lot with the uprising in 1857. And as a result, they were captured by the British, tied to the nozzle of a cannon and blown away. Okay. Now, what that meant to the people of that region becomes evident if you listen to the songs. And when I was talking to, this is 1857, and I'm talking to them in 2022-23, and those people continue to say, I asked them, why is it that your songs are constantly referencing Rani Durgawati and Raja Shankar Raghunath? And he says, oh, because those are the two resistances we had. The first against the Mughals, the second against the British. And these are the villain, the bad people are the outsiders. This is very interesting because a lot of people will tell you, the traditional feudal structure in tribal areas is deeply exploitative and so on. There will be a lot of noise like that. But if you actually go and listen to their songs, the Gond songs, you will see that there is not one single Gond song that ever says anything bad about any of the Rajgond rulers. Not one. They valorize Rani Durgawati. To a lesser extent, they valorize Raja Shankar Raghunath. But they also talk in glowing terms about Hirde Shah. They will talk in glowing terms about Amhan Shah. They will talk in glowing terms about Madhukar Shah and so on. The Gond king or queen is never seen as an exploitative force. The exploiters are the outsiders. And it is very clearly stated. The army from Delhi has come. Where shall we go, my brother? Let us invoke the goddess. Let us see if she will give us, lightning and thunder with which we can fight them. Similarly, in this land of the English, where will we go for survival? In order to pay the tax on the land, we have to sell a buffalo. In order to pay the tax on the buffalo, we have to sell a child. How shall we fill our pots with gruel? These songs leave you in no doubt as to who the exploiters were. And it is very interesting also to understand that the first recorded famine in that area happened after the British took over the region after the Third Anglo-Maratha War. So, and Third Anglo-Maratha was 1830, 1820, 1830, and the first famine is recorded sometime around the 1840s. Okay, and after that, there are repeated recordings of famine, of epidemic, of people. People had so little to eat that what they used to have. They used to have something called page, which is like a gruel. Okay, and that it is millet gruel. Very little millet, more water. That's what they would have. That's their basic food. When the famine hit them, there was no millet to be had, no grains to be had. Some people would dig up the grain, the seeds that they had sown in the soil. They would dig that up and boil that and eat it. But mostly what they would do is they would take the dung of hare, rabbit dung, and mix that with water and drink that. Can you believe that it is a picture of horrific deprivation? Horrific. I mean, and it is there in those songs. All you have to do is look at those songs. I mean, Shamsrao Dibale and Varier Alvin have done an excellent job of documenting those songs. In song after song after song, you're talking about this. How shall we feed our children? How shall we fulfill our bellies? Again and again. And this kind of anger at a foreign power that is looking at them as expendable, as people. In fact, they were told that you cannot hunt in the once the entire administration was, Madhya Pradesh became part of the central provinces under Sir Richard Temple. They chose the best forest lands, and they said that the tribals will not have access to it. Yes. Why? Because they will hunt too many animals, and then those animals will go extinct. Except that their own officials, again, there's documented evidence where saying, "Oh my God, I'm being sent to the central provinces. That's a terrible area. Except that there is plenty of game." So it's okay for a white Englishman to go around shooting as many animals as he wants. But the Gonds, who make sure that they never hunt enough to so much that the delicate balance between them and nature is disturbed, they are not allowed to access the. So, you have these sort of very, very exploitative, lopsided, in fact, just plain cruel measures again and again. And suddenly you see there are a series of rebellions, uprisings. And in many of those uprisings, it is the local zamindar or the local sardar who's leading those uprisings. So, and of course, the British hit back at them with incredible brutality. Incredible.
So to conclude, Nandini, you have written this book, and it really is important in terms of what it says. And of course, like I asked you in the beginning, you when you write a book, of course, the subject matter is important, but also the audience is important. Now, who do you have in mind? This is for whom, and where would you like to see this book reach? Like, I personally think, like I told you, I teach too, and whenever I want to give examples of the principles of dharma that govern the lives of Indic rulers, and how the praja was they were looked after as children, actually, and the ruler was looked after as a parent, was viewed as a parent who would take care of the children, to contrast it with other measures. So where do you want this book to go? Like, if you had a wish list, like, where would you want this book to reach? Like,
I want, honestly, I want every child in every high school, every undergrad student who is remotely interested in history or in their own stories to read this book, because we don't need to. I mean, how many times have we spoken about Queen Elizabeth I and what a wonderful ruler she was? Sure, she must have been a wonderful ruler, but we have wonderful rulers of our own. Why don't we read those stories? There are so many of our own stories. We need to own them. We need to read about them. We need to remember them.
So I think with that we come to the end of this one. It's very important that those should get a copy and also It's like I try and recommend this book and its contents, understand the parallel structure of governance that happened in India, even as you discuss the much famed liberals and others, So you must understand that this was an alternative, a very viable alternative, where the people thrived under a better. So for me, this I cannot recommend it. And thank you, Nandini, for writing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I do hope a lot of young people will read this book and take some inspiration from the life of this Virangan.
We conclude this book talk. Thank you.